The Palace Hotel, San Francisco. A blinding storm of camera flashes. The atmosphere is thick with old money and new ambition. The grand ballroom of the Palace Hotel was suffocatingly bright. To the outside world, this was the pinnacle of Silicon Valley's success. Brad Sterling, CEO of Origin, stood center stage, clutching the Crystal Innovator of the Year trophy like a weapon. He looked every inch the modern titan in his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, projecting the kind of confidence that drove stock prices up by double digits. Beside him stood Serafina Sarah Cross. At 38, she possessed a quiet, fading elegance. She wore a vintage Chanel gown, a relic from her family's dynasty before they lost their fortune, standing in stark contrast to the aggressive new money glitz filling the room. To the press, she was the devoted wife. To Brad, she was a prop. "Smile, darling. You look miserable," Brad whispered through his teeth, his media-perfect grin never wavering for a second. "The board is watching." Sarah forced the corners of her mouth up. Out of habit, she reached up to straighten his silk Hermes tie, which had shifted slightly during his acceptance speech. It was an intimate gesture, one she had performed 1,000 times over 10 years of marriage. She leaned in close to his chest. That was when the illusion shattered. It wasn't the scent of his usual sandalwood cologne. It was something else. Sweet, metallic, and aggressively expensive. Baccarat Rouge 540. It was the scent of a woman who desperately wanted to be noticed. And Sarah never wore perfume. She froze, her fingers lingering on the silk knot. Her eyes darted to his collar. There, barely visible against the pristine white starch, was a microscopic smudge of shimmer powder. Brad felt her stiffen. His grip on her waist tightened, his fingers digging into her ribs with bruising force. The cameras clicked away, capturing what looked like a loving embrace. "Don't cause a scene, Sarah," he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing octave only she could hear. "We are closing the Series B funding tomorrow. If you ruin this valuation, I will leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back." Sarah pulled away, her breath trembling. Just then, Tiffany Blaze, the company's 25-year-old strategy director, glided past the press line. She was wearing a plunging red dress and checking the time on her Cartier watch. As she passed Brad, she didn't look at him, but the trail of Baccarat Rouge she left behind was unmistakable. Tiffany caught Sarah's eye and offered a small, pitying smile. It wasn't an apology. It was a notification of expiration. The ride back to their estate in Pacific Heights was deafeningly silent. The soundproof glass of the Mercedes Maybach S-Class insulated them from the San Francisco rain, but inside, the air was toxic. Sarah sat rigidly, clutching her purse, her mind racing. She wasn't just going to cry, she was going to find proof. As soon as the heavy oak doors of their mansion closed behind them, Sarah didn't head to the master bedroom. She went straight to Brad's study. She knew he kept a backup ledger in the wall safe behind the abstract painting. She needed to see the numbers. If Tiffany was the strategy director, the betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was financial. "Sarah, stop," Brad's voice echoed from the hallway, calm and terrifyingly steady. "You're having another episode." "Episode?" Sarah spun around, her hands trembling as she reached for the safe's keypad. "I smelled her on you, Brad. I saw the way she looked at me. Don't you dare gaslight me." She punched in the code. Their anniversary. Error. She tried Leo's birthday. Error. Brad leaned against the doorframe, checking a notification on his iPhone 15 Pro Max. He looked bored. "See? This is what Dr. Aris was warning us about. Paranoia, manic behavior. You're imagining codes, just like you imagined that smell." "I am not crazy," Sarah screamed, frustration boiling over. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the desk, threatening to smash the lock. "No," Brad said softly. "But you are a liability." Suddenly, the front door burst open. Blue and red lights flashed against the rain-slicked windows outside. Sarah froze. Two uniformed officers and a woman in a white coat walked into the foyer. "Mrs. Sterling?" the woman asked, stepping forward cautiously. "I'm Dr. Evans. Your husband called us. He's very concerned about your safety." Sarah stumbled back, the decanter slipping from her hand and shattering on the hardwood floor. "What? No, he's lying! He's cheating on me!" Brad stepped forward, his face a mask of tragic concern. He handed the officers a stack of documents. "She's been transferring funds from the charity account to offshore gambling sites. She's been hallucinating all week, claiming I'm having affairs with my employees. Look at her. She's violent." "That's a lie!" Sarah lunged toward him, but the officers intercepted her. "Ma'am, please calm down," the officer said, grabbing her arms. "It's an involuntary psychiatric hold," Brad whispered to the doctor, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "For her own good, and for the safety of our son." "Leo!" Sarah gasped, realizing the true horror of his plan. "Where is Leo?" "He's safe," Brad said, smoothing his tuxedo jacket. "With his new guardian." As the officers dragged Sarah out into the rain, forcing her into the back of an ambulance instead of a police car, she saw a figure standing in the upstairs window. It was Tiffany, holding a glass of wine, watching the show. The 72-hour psychiatric hold was a masterclass in corporate brutality. Brad didn't need to keep Sarah locked up forever. He just needed her out of the way long enough to change the locks in the narrative. When the hospital finally discharged her, citing acute stress but no permanent psychosis, Sarah walked out into the harsh sunlight of a Tuesday afternoon with nothing but the clothes on her back and a clear plastic bag containing her personal effects. She immediately tried to hail a cab. She pulled out her American Express Centurion card, the black card that had never been declined in a decade of marriage. The driver swiped it. Declined. "Try it again," Sarah pleaded, her voice raspy from days of screaming at nurses. "It says card reported stolen, lady." "Do you have cash?" the driver asked, eyeing her wrinkled, stained evening gown with suspicion. Sarah stepped out of the cab, humiliated. She used her last few dollars of emergency cash to take a bus back to Pacific Heights. When she arrived at the wrought iron gates of their estate, her heart stopped. There was a moving truck in the driveway. Not moving things in, moving things out. Two men were hauling boxes labeled Master Bedroom Closet A. Sarah watched in horror as a mover carelessly tossed one of her vintage Dior blazers onto a pile of donations. "Hey, stop!" Sarah ran toward the gate, slamming her hand against the intercom. "That's my property. Open the gate, Henry." Henry, the security guard who had waved her through every day for 6 years, stepped out of the booth. He didn't look her in the eye. "I can't do that, Mrs. Sterling. Mr. Sterling has issued a standing trespassing order against you." "Trespassing? I live here. My son is in there." "Not anymore, ma'am." Henry slid a manila envelope through the bars. "Mr. Sterling's lawyers dropped this off for you. It's a temporary restraining order. You're to stay 500 feet away from the property and from Leo." Sarah ripped the envelope open. The legal jargon swam before her eyes. Unstable behavior, imminent danger to the minor, emergency temporary guardianship granted to Ms. Tiffany Blaise. Before she could scream, the front door of the mansion opened. Tiffany stepped out. She wasn't wearing business attire anymore. She was wearing one of Sarah's silk robes, holding a mug of coffee like she owned the sunrise. Behind her, little Leo ran out, chasing a ball. He looked toward the gate. "Mommy?" Tiffany immediately grabbed Leo's shoulder, steering him back inside. "Come inside, Leo. That's just a crazy lady yelling at the gate. We don't talk to her." The heavy oak door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Sarah sank to her knees on the cold pavement, Sita gripping the iron bars until her knuckles turned white. She had lost her home, her money, and her child in a single weekend. Rain began to fall again in San Francisco, washing away the last of Sarah's dignity. She had nowhere to go. Her friends from the country club had blocked her number. Brad's PR team had done an excellent job painting her as a hysterical addict. She wandered aimlessly toward the financial district, shivering in her ruined gown, clutching the restraining order like a shield. She found herself standing outside the towering glass monolith of Thorne Capital. Atticus Thorne. The name was whispered with fear in every boardroom Brad ever entered. He was a corporate raider, a vulture capitalist who dismantled weak companies for sport. Brad hated him. That was exactly why Sarah needed him. She waited by the private exit of the parking garage. Hours passed. Her teeth chattered. Finally, a sleek, matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided up the ramp, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Sarah didn't think. She stepped directly into the car's path. The brakes screeched. The massive vehicle halted inches from her knees. The rear window rolled down, revealing a man in a sharp charcoal suit, working on an iPad Pro. Atticus Thorne looked up, his gray eyes cold and assessing. He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. "If this is an insurance scam," Atticus said, his voice deep and smooth like aged whiskey, "you picked the wrong car. My lawyers will bury you before you hit the ground." "I don't want your money," Sarah said, her voice trembling but her gaze steady. She walked to the window, some rain dripping from her hair onto the pavement. "I want to destroy Origin." Atticus paused. He set the iPad down. A flicker of interest sparked in his eyes. He recognized her now. The trophy wife from the gala. The crazy woman from the tabloids. "Mrs. Sterling," he drawled. "Or is it Miss Cross now? I heard you had a breakdown. Why should I listen to a woman who supposedly hallucinates cheat codes?" "Because Brad isn't the genius everyone thinks he is," Sarah said, gripping the window ledge. "He's cooking the books. The Series B funding relies on a patent he doesn't fully own. I know where the bodies are buried, Atticus. I dug the graves." Atticus studied her face. He saw the desperation, yes, but beneath it, he saw a burning, terrifying rage. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning. He pressed a button on the door. Click. "Get in," he said, turning back to his screen. "But if you ruin my upholstery, I'm billing you." Sarah opened the heavy door and slid into the warmth of the leather interior. The car smelled of expensive leather and rain. As they pulled away into the night, leaving her old life behind on the wet pavement, she knew she had just sold her soul. But for Leo, she would have sold it twice. The elevator ride to the top of the Millennium Tower was silent and oppressively fast. When the doors slid open, Sarah stepped into a world of cold, hard power. Atticus Thorne's penthouse wasn't a home. It was a command center. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the San Francisco skyline, glittering like a circuit board below. Atticus didn't offer her a coat or a kind word. He walked straight to a wet bar carved from black marble. Pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 25, he slid one across the counter toward her. "Drink," he commanded, not looking up. "Then talk. You have 5 minutes before security escorts you out. Convince me why I shouldn't let Brad Sterling's stock hit an all-time high tomorrow." Sarah didn't touch the whiskey. She stood shivering in her ruined gown, but her eyes were dry. "Brad's growth numbers for Q3 are fake. He's counting active users based on pre-installed hospital software that hasn't been activated yet. It's a ghost metric. Atticus paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He turned slowly. That's a bold claim. Everyone knows Origen is the darling of Wall Street. The SEC has audited them twice. The SEC looks at the ledger Brad shows them, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. They don't look at the sandbox server. That's where he runs the bot farms to simulate patient traffic. He calls it stress testing, but he includes that data in the investor reports. Atticus set his drink down. The air in the room shifted. He walked over to a massive desk dominated by a glowing Bloomberg terminal. He typed in a few commands, watching the ticker for Origen. If that's true, Atticus murmured, his eyes scanning the data streams, then the company is overvalued by at least 40%. It's a house of cards. It is, Sarah confirmed. And I know the password to the sandbox. Atticus looked at her then, really looked at her. He didn't see a broken housewife anymore. He saw a weapon. He saw insider trading potential that could make him millions while destroying his rival. What do you want, Sarah? He asked, his voice low. I want my son back, she said, stepping closer. And I want to see Brad lose everything. His company, his reputation, his freedom. I want him to feel exactly how I felt standing outside that gate. Atticus picked up a sleek black remote and dimmed the lights. The city glow illuminating his sharp features. You're going to need a lawyer, a wardrobe, and a place to sleep, Atticus said, taking a sip of his scotch. I'll give you all three, but from this moment on, you work for me. We aren't just going to sue him, Sarah. We are going to short sell his entire life. While Sarah was plotting war in a penthouse above the clouds, a different kind of takeover was happening in Pacific Heights. Tiffany Blaze was busy erasing every trace of Sarah from the mansion. She hired a team of movers to box up Sarah's library, rare first editions and art books collected over a lifetime, and replace them with modern, soulless sculptures. She walked through the halls wearing a silk kimono, issuing orders to the staff with the arrogance of someone who had never earned $1 honestly. Burn those, she said, pointing to a collection of family photo albums. They clutter the aesthetic. But the cruelest act was reserved for the nursery. Little Leo, only 6 years old, was sitting on his bed, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. It was the only thing he had left that smelled like his mom. Tiffany breezed into the room, holding her iPhone 15 up to record a story for Instagram. She put on a bright, fake smile. Hey guys, just doing a little room refresh for my favorite stepson. Say hi, Leo. Leo turned away, hiding his face in the rabbit. I want my mommy. Tiffany's smile twitched. She stopped recording. She walked over to the bed and snatched the rabbit out of his hands. Hey, Leo cried, reaching for it. This is old and dirty, Leo, Tiffany said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Daddy bought you new toys. Look. She pointed to a pile of unopened boxes, a PlayStation 5, a drone, expensive Lego sets, things Brad bought to buy the boys silence. Your mom isn't coming back because she's sick. She hurt you, remember? That's what the police said. She didn't, Leo shouted, tears streaming down his face. She loves me. Tiffany tossed the rabbit into a trash bag filled with Sarah's clothes. Well, she's gone. And if you keep crying, Daddy is going to send you to boarding school. Is that what you want? Leo went silent, trembling. The threat worked. Tiffany patted his head condescendingly, checked her reflection in the mirror, and walked out. What she didn't know was that the stuffed rabbit wasn't just a toy. Hidden deep inside the stuffing, sewn in months ago by a paranoid but brilliant Sarah, was a tiny dormant baby monitor with a recording function. It was currently offline, its battery dead. But it was still in the trash bag. And that trash bag was sitting next to the curb, waiting for the garbage truck, unless someone retrieved it. Sunlight flooded the penthouse, but the mood inside was cold and clinical. Sarah sat at a glass table surrounded by legal pads and empty coffee cups. She had barely slept. Atticus was pacing, talking into a headset about liquidating assets and market volatility, his voice a low hum of controlled aggression. "We need a smoking gun, Sarah," Atticus said, ending the call and tossing his headset onto the leather sofa. "The sandbox server is good, but it's technical. Juries get bored with code. We need theft. We need intent." Sarah looked down at the plastic bag of personal effects the hospital had returned to her. Inside, amidst a tangle of chargers and receipts, was her old iPad Pro. The screen was cracked, damage from when Leo dropped it months ago, but she had used it for everything. Ordering groceries from Whole Foods, scheduling playdates, and managing the house staff. "Brad is arrogant," Sarah murmured, pulling the device out. "He thinks he's the only one who understands technology." "What are you doing?" Atticus asked, leaning over her shoulder. "He never changed the family iCloud password. He said it was too much hassle to update all the smart home devices," Sarah said. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She typed in the password. "Aura Gen 2024. The screen flickered. The Apple logo appeared. "If he's still logged in," Sarah whispered. "Everything he does on his phone syncs here." The device connected to the penthouse Wi-Fi. Immediately, a flood of notifications began to cascade down the screen. iMessage previews, calendar alerts, and then the Photos app began to update. Sarah's stomach turned. The first few images were innocent enough. Brad at a lunch meeting, a picture of a wine bottle. Then, the selfies appeared. Tiffany wearing Sarah's jewelry, posing in the master bathroom. Tiffany driving the Porsche 911 Brad had bought for company use. "Look at the timestamps," Atticus noted, him pointing to a screenshot in the Recents folder. It wasn't a selfie. It was a screenshot of a banking confirmation. Sarah zoomed in. It was a wire transfer of $250,000 from the Origin Charity Fund to an entity called Blue Ocean Consulting in the Cayman Islands. "Blue Ocean," Sarah read aloud. "That's not a vendor. That's a shell company." She swiped, another screenshot. This one was a text conversation between Brad and Tiffany. "Brad, transfer is done. Make sure the ledger shows it as R&D expenses." Tiffany, "Don't worry, baby. I'm the best investment you ever made." Atticus let out a dark, satisfied laugh. "They aren't just sleeping together. They're embezzling, and they're stupid enough to keep digital trophies." "Why would they screenshot it?" Sarah asked. "Insurance," Atticus said, his eyes gleaming. "They don't trust each other. This isn't a love affair, Sarah. It's a hostage situation. And we just found the key." The evidence on the iPad was a weapon, but Atticus made one thing clear. A weapon is useless if the soldier holding it looks weak. "You look like a victim," Atticus said bluntly the next morning. He was standing by the window, sipping espresso from a Nespresso Vertuo machine. The court, the press, the board, they judge with their eyes. If you walk in there looking like the grieving housewife, Brad wins. You need to look like you own the building. He snapped his fingers. The elevator doors slid open. A team of 3 people walked in. A stylist, a tailor, and a hair artist. They wheeled in racks of clothing covered in garment bags branded with names that commanded respect. Saint Laurent, Dior, or Alexander McQueen. "This isn't a makeover," Atticus told her, watching from his desk as he analyzed stock trends. "This is rebranding. You are no longer Mrs. Sterling. You are Miss Cross, the heir to a legacy." Sarah stood before the mirror. She touched her long, fraying hair. hair that Brad used to say he liked because it made her look soft. "Cut it," Sarah said to the stylist. "Short, sharp." The scissors snipped. Locks of hair fell to the marble floor. 2 hours later, Sarah stepped out of the dressing room. She was unrecognizable. Gone were the pastel cardigans and modest skirts. In their place, she wore a structured black Saint Laurent blazer with sharp shoulders, tailored cigarette trousers, and a pair of Christian Louboutin stilettos that clicked against the floor like gunshots. Her hair was now a sleek, twisted asymmetrical bob that framed her face, highlighting the cold determination in her eyes. She didn't look soft anymore. She looked dangerous. Atticus looked up from his screens. He paused for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her shoes to her eyes. He didn't smile, but there was a flash of approval in his expression. "Better," he said. He tossed a thick leather binder onto the table. "Now that you look the part, you need to learn the language. Forensic accounting, corporate law, market manipulation." Sarah sat down, crossing her legs. She picked up the binder. "I wrote the original algorithm for Origin, Atticus. I don't need to learn the language. I invented it." "Good," Atticus replied, leaning back in his Eames chair. "Because tonight we aren't just studying, we're going hunting." He slid a black invite across the table. It was for an underground poker game in Silicon Valley, the kind where venture capitalists bet with equity instead of chips. "Brad will be there," Atticus said, "and you're going to walk in and make him fold." The poker game wasn't in a casino. It was in the back room of a nondescript dive bar in the Mission District, a place favored by tech billionaires who wanted to pretend they were still gritty. The air smelled of stale beer and expensive cigars. Brad Sterling sat at the main table laughing loudly. He was high on success, casually tossing chips into the pot while Tiffany whispered in his ear. They looked like royalty presiding over a court of sycophants. When the heavy steel door creaked open, the room didn't go silent immediately. But as the silhouette stepped into the dim light, the conversation died out like a blown candle. Sarah Cross walked in. She wasn't hiding. She was radiant. The sharp cut of her blazer, the glint of her Cartier earrings, borrowed from Atticus's personal vault, and the terrifying calm on her face made her look like an entirely different species from the woman Brad had committed to a psych ward days ago. Brad choked on his whiskey. Tiffany's smile froze. "Lost, sweetheart?" Brad sneered, trying to recover his composure. "The soup kitchen is down the street." Sarah didn't even look at him. She walked past his table, the heels of her Louboutins echoing on the concrete floor. She headed straight for the private booth in the back corner. Sitting there were 3 elderly men in tweed jackets. To the untrained eye, they looked like retired professors. In reality, they were the original angel investors of the Cross family empire, men who had been pushed out by Brad years ago. Sarah sat down with them. She ordered a sparkling water. Brad watched, his paranoia spiking. "What is she doing?" he hissed to Tiffany. "Who are those guys?" "Just old geezers," Tiffany scoffed, checking her nails. "Ignore her. She's just trying to get your attention." But Brad couldn't ignore her. He watched as Sarah pulled out a tablet and showed the men something. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to outrage. One of the men slammed his fist on the table. "It's a bluff," Brad muttered, sweat forming on his brow. "She has nothing. I took everything." He didn't know that Sarah wasn't just showing them charts. She was showing them the Blue Ocean Shell Company transfer. She was planting the seed of doubt in the very people who still held significant voting proxies in Origin. Sarah caught Brad staring. She didn't glare. She didn't frown. She simply raised her glass of water in a mock toast, her eyes cold and empty. Brad stood up, knocking his chair over. "I'm done," he announced, gathering his chips aggressively. "This place stinks." As he stormed out with Tiffany trailing behind him, complaining about her heels, Sarah finally allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. The bait had been taken. Brad was no longer thinking about the IPO. He was thinking about her, and a distracted enemy is a vulnerable one. The seed of paranoia Sarah planted had blossomed overnight. Brad was distracted, irritable, and constantly checking his encrypted messaging apps. But while he was focused on Sarah, he failed to notice the knife being sharpened right next to him. Back in the penthouse, Atticus and Sarah were monitoring the flow of digital assets. The Bloomberg terminal was humming with activity, but it wasn't the stock market they were watching. It was the blockchain. "Look at this wallet address," Atticus said, pointing to a string of alphanumeric characters on the screen. "There's been a massive outflow of Ethereum from a private wallet linked to Tiffany's personal email." Sarah leaned in. "Is she cashing out?" "No," Atticus said, his brow furrowing. "She's transferring it to a wallet associated with Vortex MedTech." Sarah gasped. "Vortex? They are Brad's biggest competitor. They've been trying to replicate our algorithm for years." "Exactly," Atticus said, typing furiously. "Tiffany isn't just a gold digger, Sarah. She's a corporate spy. She's selling Brad's proprietary user data to his rival. She's double-crossing him." It all made sense. The pressure to get the Series B funding, the rush to launch. Tiffany was pushing Brad to inflate the company's value so she could steal the data at its peak price before the bubble burst. She didn't love Brad. She was going to leave him holding the bag for massive fraud while she disappeared with millions in crypto. "Does Brad know?" Sarah asked. "He thinks she's his loyal queen," Atticus replied. "He's too arrogant to believe a 25-year-old Instagram model could outsmart him." Sarah stared at the screen. A complicated emotion washed over her. It wasn't pity, but it was close. Brad had destroyed his family for a woman who was actively selling him out. "We can use this," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But not yet. Trick, if we reveal it now, Brad might cut a deal with the feds to save himself. We need him to stay on the sinking ship until it's underwater." "Agreed," Atticus said. He turned to look at her, admiration evident in his gaze. "You're getting good at this. Almost too good." "I learned from the worst," Sarah replied coldly. Suddenly, Sarah's burner phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Pier 14, midnight. Come alone. I have information about Leo." Sarah's heart stopped. "It's a trap," Atticus warned immediately. "I know," Sarah said, grabbing her coat. "But if it's about my son, I have to walk into it." The wind on Pier 14 was biting, carrying the salty spray of the San Francisco Bay. It was midnight, and the fog was thick enough to swallow a person whole. Sarah stood under a flickering lamppost, her hands buried deep in her trench coat pockets. She wasn't unarmed. She had a small can of pepper spray, and Atticus was parked 2 blocks away in the Rolls-Royce, tracking her location via GPS. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Brad. It was Dr. Evans, the psychiatrist who had signed Sarah's commitment papers. Sarah stiffened. "What do you want? Is Leo okay?" Dr. Evans looked nervous. She kept glancing over her shoulder. "He's physically fine, but mentally, Mrs. Sterling, I can't sleep at night." "Then tell the truth," Sarah snapped. "You signed a false diagnosis. You took my son away." "Brad threatened to ruin my practice," the doctor whispered, her voice trembling. "He said he'd expose my personal debts. But today I saw the bruises on Leo's arm. He said he fell. But the grip marks, they were adult-sized." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Who did it? Brad?" "No," Dr. Evans shook her head. "The nanny said it was Mrs. Blaze. She lost her temper when he wouldn't eat." Rage, white-hot and blinding, surged through Sarah. "Testify," she demanded. "Go to the judge tomorrow and tell him everything." "I can't," Dr. Evans sobbed. "Brad owns the clinic now. If I speak, I lose my license. I wanted you to know. You need to get him out, now." Before Sarah could grab her, the doctor turned and ran back into the fog. The next morning, the preliminary custody hearing began. The courtroom was packed. Brad sat with his legal team, looking bored and confident. Tiffany was absent. "Shopping for the wedding," Brad claimed. But Sarah knew she was likely moving crypto assets. Sarah's lawyer, hired by Atticus, presented a motion for emergency visitation, citing anonymous tips about abuse. Brad's lawyer stood up, smooth and venomous. "Your Honor, this is harassment. Mrs. Sterling is unstable. She's stalking my client's doctors. We have security footage of her accosting Dr. Evans on a pier at midnight." He played a grainy video. It looked like Sarah was threatening the doctor. Without audio, her desperation looked like aggression. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "Miss Cross, your behavior is erratic. Motion denied. The temporary custody remains with Mr. Sterling, and I'm extending the restraining order to 1,000 feet. Brad smirked. He didn't know about the bruises. He didn't care. He had won the battle. Sarah sat frozen. Atticus placed a hand over hers under the table. His grip was iron hard. "Patience," he whispered. "He won the skirmish. He hasn't seen the warhead yet." The courtroom defeat was bitter, but Atticus didn't believe in mourning. He believed in leverage. "Brad thinks he's untouchable because his stock price is high," Atticus said back at the penthouse, watching the CNBC ticker. "So we take away his shield." It was time for the financial assault. Atticus initiated a massive short sell on Origen. Using his influence, he quietly released a report through a third-party analyst firm. The report didn't mention the divorce or the custody battle. It focused purely on the sandbox server anomaly Sarah had discovered. Headline: Is Origen's growth artificial? Analysts question data integrity. Within minutes, the market reacted. The stock dipped 2%, then 5%. Brad's phone began to blow up. At the Origen headquarters, panic set in. Brad was screaming at his CFO. "Who leaked this? Who questioned the data?" "It's an anonymous report, sir," the CFO stammered. "But the volume of short selling, someone with deep pockets is betting against us." Brad stormed into Tiffany's office. She was on her laptop, looking uncharacteristically flustered. She slammed the lid shut as he entered. "Did you see the stock?" Brad yelled. "We're bleeding! Fix the PR! Tell them it's a competitor smear campaign!" "I'm trying, Brad," Tiffany snapped, her mask slipping. "But the investors are asking for raw data logs. You told me the logs were clean." "They are clean enough," Brad roared. "Just sign the compliance affidavit. Take responsibility for the data accuracy. I need to focus on the board." He shoved a stack of legal documents toward her. Tiffany hesitated. If she signed, she would be personally liable for any fraud. "Sign it, or the wedding is off," Brad threatened, his eyes cold. "I made you. I can break you." Tiffany stared at him. The fear in her eyes wasn't for him anymore. It was for her own survival. She picked up the Mont Blanc pen. Her hand trembled. She signed. Back in the penthouse, Sarah watched the stock ticker turn red. A grim satisfaction settled in her chest. He just forced her to take the fall, Sarah realized. He's setting her up as the scapegoat. "Exactly," Atticus said, pouring 2 glasses of water. "Now the rats start eating each other. And when they do, the truth about Leo will come out." The financial chaos at Origen created the perfect smokescreen. While Brad was busy fighting fires with the SEC and screaming at investors, his grip on the domestic front loosened. Sarah received a notification. The baby monitor hidden in Leo's stuffed rabbit, the one Tiffany had thrown in the trash, had just come online. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee. How? It was in the garbage. The gardener, Atticus deduced, looking at the GPS signal. He must have fished it out. Maybe he took it home for his own kids, or maybe he put it back in the house. They listened intently. The audio crackled, then cleared. Stop crying, you little brat. It was Tiffany's voice, shrill, panicked. I want my daddy, Leo's voice whimpered. I'm hungry. Daddy is busy saving the money I'm going to spend, Tiffany yelled. There was a sound of glass shattering. You think I want to be here? I hate this house. I hate you. As soon as the wire transfer clears, I'm gone, and you'll be in boarding school in Switzerland. Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Atticus's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He started recording. Then, a new voice entered the audio feed. Miss Blaze, it was the housekeeper, Maria. Please, let him eat. He hasn't had dinner. Shut up, Maria, or I'll fire you like I fired the last one. Tiffany shrieked. Go pack his bags. Brad wants him out of the way for the press conference tomorrow. The audio cut out. We have it, Sarah whispered, her voice shaking with rage. We have the abuse. We have the intent to flee. It's inadmissible in family court without a warrant, Atticus said, his pragmatic side warring with his anger. It's an illegal recording. I don't care about the court right now. Sarah stood up, grabbing her coat. She's hurting him. I'm going there. Sarah, if you violate the restraining order, you go to jail. Atticus blocked her path. And Leo stays with them forever. Get out of my way, Atticus. No. He grabbed her shoulders. We don't storm the castle with a pitchfork. We burn it down from the inside. Tomorrow is the press conference. Brad is going to put Leo on stage to show the world he's a family man. That is when we strike. Sarah looked into his eyes. She saw the promise of violence there, controlled and precise. She took a breath. Okay, she said. Tomorrow, we end them. The day of the final hearing arrived, coinciding perfectly with Brad's desperate PR stunt. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters. Half were there for the financial scandal rocking Origen, so the other half for the high-profile divorce drama. Brad arrived in a convoy of Cadillac Escalades. He stepped out, looking haggard but impeccably dressed in a navy Brioni suit. He held Leo's hand tightly. The boy looked pale, dressed in a miniature suit, his eyes darting around fearfully. Tiffany followed, wearing oversized sunglasses and a white dress that screamed innocence, though her Hermes Kelly bag was white-knuckled. Mr. Sterling, is it true the SEC is investigating? Mr. Sterling, did you falsify patient data? Brad ignored the questions, lifting Leo up for the cameras. My son and I are standing strong against these malicious lies, he declared. Leo didn't smile. He looked like a hostage. Sarah watched from the tinted window of Atticus's car across the street. Seeing her son used as a prop made her blood run cold. Ready? Atticus asked. He wasn't wearing his usual sharkskin suit. Today, he wore the robes of a litigator. He had officially filed as her lead counsel that morning. I'm ready, Sarah said. She stepped out. The hush that fell over the crowd was instantaneous. Sarah Cross didn't look like the victim anymore. She wore a white power suit, a direct visual challenge to Tiffany's dress, and walked with the lethal grace of a predator. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy. Brad's legal team, a phalanx of 5 partners from top firms, took up half the room. They looked confident. They had the signed affidavits, the fake medical records, and the restraining order. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Holloway took the bench. He looked tired of this case. We are here to settle the matter of permanent custody and the division of assets. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed. Brad's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, the facts are simple. Miss Cross is mentally unstable and financially destitute. My client is a pillar of the community, a CEO, and a devoted father. We ask for full custody and the enforcement of the prenuptial agreement. The judge nodded, turning to the defense table. Miss Cross, do you have representation today? Atticus Thorne stood up. The room gasped. Even the judge looked surprised to see the famous corporate raider in a family court. I represent Ms. Cross, Your Honor, Atticus said, his voice filling the room. And we aren't here to argue for custody based on emotion. We are here to argue it based on ownership. Brad scoffed audibly. Ownership? She owns nothing. Atticus smiled. It was a terrifying sight. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Sterling. You see, you forgot who built the castle you're living in. The courtroom tension was palpable, but Tiffany Blaze seemed immune to it. She sat in the witness box, crossing her legs elegantly, the picture of modern success. Brad's lawyer had called her to testify to Sarah's unfit parenting. Ms. Blaze, the lawyer asked smoothly, describe the state of the household when you moved in to assist Mr. Sterling. Tiffany adjusted the microphone, her diamond bracelet catching the light. It was chaotic, she said, her voice soft and rehearsed. Leo was neglected. He was hungry. The house was a mess. Mrs. Sterling spent all day in her room, talking to herself. I had to step in. I had to be the mother he didn't have. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands clasped on the table. She didn't react. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. And how did Mrs. Sterling react to your help? She was violent, Tiffany lied effortlessly. She threw things. She threatened me. I was terrified for Leo's safety. That's why Brad, Mr. Sterling, had to protect him. Brad nodded from his seat, looking every bit the concerned protector. Tiffany looked directly at Sarah then. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. It was a smile that said, I won. I have your husband, your house, and your son. She leaned into the microphone. I just want what's best for the family. Someone has to be the adult. The gallery murmured in sympathy. Brad's narrative was working. Thank you, Ms. Blaze, the lawyer said, sitting down with a satisfied smirk. Cross-examination? The judge asked. Atticus stood up. He didn't walk to the podium. He walked straight to the witness box, stopping inches from Tiffany. He held nothing in his hands. No papers. No notes. Ms. Blaze, Atticus began, his voice deceptively polite. You claim to be the adult in the room. You claim to care about the family's assets. I do, Tiffany replied, narrowing her eyes. Then can you explain, Atticus asked, turning to face the gallery, why you purchased a one-way ticket to Zurich for this evening? Under your maiden name? Tiffany's smile faltered. It's a business trip. A business trip? Atticus raised an eyebrow. Is that why you emptied your personal savings account yesterday? And why you transferred 500 Bitcoin to a cold wallet located in Switzerland? Brad's head snapped up. What? He whispered. Objection! Brad's lawyer shouted. Relevance. It goes to character, Your Honor, Atticus boomed. And to motive. Because Ms. Blaze isn't here to become a mother. She's here to become a fugitive. Tiffany's face went pale. The smile was gone. In its place was the look of a trapped animal. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Brad was staring at Tiffany with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Tiffany was gripping the railing of the witness box, her knuckles white, stammering denials that nobody was listening to. Order! Judge Holloway banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Order in this court! When silence finally returned, it was heavy and suffocating. The judge looked down at Atticus. Mr. Thorne, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof of this flight risk? I do, Your Honor, Atticus said calmly. He signaled to his assistant, who handed a thick file to the bailiff. Airline confirmations, bank transfers, and IP logs linking Ms. Blaze to the crypto wallet. But that is merely the appetizer. Atticus turned his back on Tiffany, dismissing her completely. He walked over to Brad. Mr. Sterling, Atticus said, you claim my client is destitute. You claim you are the sole owner of Origin and all its assets. I am the founder and CEO, Brad spat, his voice shaking with repressed rage. My name is on the building. Yes, Atticus agreed. Your name is on the building. But who owns the ground it stands on? Atticus pulled a single yellowed document from his jacket pocket. It wasn't a digital printout. It was an original contract. The ink faded with age. Your Honor, Atticus addressed the bench. 12 years ago, and when Origin was nothing but a startup in a garage, it required a core algorithm to function. The Core X patent. The judge took the document, adjusting his glasses. He read in silence for a long moment. His eyebrows shot up. He looked over his glasses at Brad. Mr. Sterling, the judge asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Are you aware of the dead man's switch clause in the original licensing agreement with the Cross Estate? Brad frowned. The Cross Estate is bankrupt. I bought their assets years ago. You bought the shell, the judge corrected him. But according to this, the intellectual property rights to Core X, the very foundation of your company, were never sold. They were leased. The judge turned the page. And the lease contains a specific clause. In the event of moral turpitude, criminal negligence, or dissolution of marriage due to infidelity by the licensee, all rights revert immediately to the grantor. Atticus smiled. And who is the grantor, Your Honor? The judge looked at Sarah. The grantor is the Leo Cross Trust. Sole trustee, Serafina Cross. The silence in the room was absolute. You don't own the company, Brad. Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice clear and ringing. You've been renting it from our son, and the lease just expired. The realization hit Brad Sterling like a physical blow. He staggered back, his legs hitting the defendant's table, his face drained of color, leaving him looking gray and old under the harsh fluorescent lights. That's impossible, he whispered, his voice cracking. I checked the contracts. See, my lawyers checked them. Your lawyers checked the digital copies you uploaded to the server, Atticus said, stepping forward. But Sarah's father was old-fashioned. He didn't trust the cloud. He trusted paper, and ink, and blood. Atticus pointed to the document in the judge's hand. Without the Core X license, Origin is legally prohibited from operating its software. Every minute your servers are running, you are committing copyright infringement. As of right now, your company is worth 0. Brad looked around the room wildly. His empire, his billions, his identity, gone in a single sentence. He turned to Tiffany, seeking an ally, anyone to share the blame. But Tiffany wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the exit. You knew, Brad accused her, his voice rising to a scream. You knew the company was vulnerable. That's why you were stealing the data. Tiffany stood up, abandoning all pretense. I knew you were a fraud, Brad. I was just cashing out before the ship sank. You witch! Brad lunged at her. Bailiffs! Judge Holloway shouted. 2 officers tackled Brad before he could reach the witness stand. He struggled, shouting obscenities, his carefully crafted mask of the civilized CEO completely shattered. Order! The judge slammed the gavel repeatedly. Mr. Sterling, you are in contempt. Sit down or be removed. While the chaos unfolded, Sarah remained seated. She watched her husband, the man who had gaslighted her, committed her to an asylum and stolen her child, unravel completely. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Atticus. The final nail, Atticus whispered. He handed a USB drive to the clerk. Your Honor, regarding the custody of Leo Sterling. We have recovered audio evidence from the child's nursery. It confirms abuse by Ms. Blaze and complicity by Mr. Sterling. The judge looked at the trembling, red-faced Brad, then at the defiant Tiffany, and finally at Sarah. Play it, the judge ordered. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. The audio quality was imperfect, muffled by layers of polyester stuffing, but the voices were unmistakable. Stop crying, you little brat, the gallery gasped. All eyes turned to Tiffany. She stood frozen, her face pale, the arrogant smile wiped clean. I want my daddy. I'm hungry. Leo's small, terrified voice echoed through the high-ceilinged room. It was a sound that broke every heart in the audience. Daddy is busy saving the money I'm going to spend. Tiffany's voice shrieked from the recording. I hate this house. I hate you. Then came the sound of the slap. A sharp, sickening thud, followed by Leo's wailing. Brad stopped struggling against the bailiffs. He stared at the speakers, his mouth open. For all his greed and narcissism, hearing his son cry, hearing the woman he chose over his wife abuse his child, seemed to pierce through his delusion. You hit him, Brad whispered, looking at Tiffany. You told me he fell. He was annoying, Tiffany screamed back, losing all control. He wouldn't shut up about his mother, just like you. Enough, Judge Holloway roared, his face flushed with anger. He didn't need to hear any more. Turn it off. The silence that followed was heavy with judgment. Ms. Blaze, the judge said, his voice icy. You are hereby remanded into custody immediately pending charges of child abuse, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Bail is denied. 2 officers moved in on Tiffany. As they handcuffed her, she thrashed, kicking her expensive Louboutins off her feet. You can't do this. I have rights. Brad, do something. But Brad did nothing. He was slumped in his chair, defeated. The judge turned to Brad. Mr. Sterling, you enabled this environment. You falsified medical records to commit your wife. You committed perjury regarding your assets. I am stripping you of all parental rights, effective immediately. No, Brad moaned, putting his head in his hands. No, please. Furthermore, the judge continued, looking at Sarah with a softened expression. Custody of Leo Sterling is awarded solely to his mother, Serafina Cross. And regarding the assets, the court recognizes the validity of the trust. Origin belongs to Ms. Cross. Sarah let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 years. She closed her eyes, tears finally spilling over. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. Pure, unadulterated freedom. The aftermath of the verdict was swift and brutal. As the bailiffs escorted Tiffany out the side door, her screams echoing down the hallway, Brad was left alone at the defendant's table. His lawyers packed up their briefcases in silence, distancing themselves from a client who could no longer pay their fees. Brad looked up as Sarah stood to leave. He looked small, the titan of industry, the man who commanded rooms, was now just a lonely, broken figure in a wrinkled suit. Sarah, he croaked. I didn't know she was hurting him. You have to believe me. Sarah paused. She turned slowly. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with the distant pity one might feel for a stranger on the news. It doesn't matter what you knew, Brad, Sarah said softly. It matters what you did. You chose money over your son. You chose a pretty face over loyalty, and now you have neither. I can fix this, Brad pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. We can rebuild the company. You need me to run it. You don't know how to handle the board, the investors. Atticus stepped forward, looming over Brad like a dark shadow. She doesn't need you, Sterling. She never did. She wrote the code. I know the market. We'll have cross technologies, profitable by Q4. Brad stared at Atticus, realizing for the first time that he had been outmaneuvered not just legally, but professionally. Goodbye, Brad, Sarah said. She turned her back on him and walked toward the heavy oak doors. Outside, the paparazzi were waiting. But this time, Sarah didn't hide. She walked down the courthouse steps, her head held high, the flashbulbs illuminating her victory. Atticus walked a step behind her, acting as her shield, letting her have the spotlight. At the bottom of the stairs, a black SUV was waiting. The door opened, and a small boy jumped out. Mommy! Leo! Sarah dropped to her knees, disregarding her white suit on the pavement. She scooped her son into her arms, burying her face in his neck. He smelled like soap and childhood, not fear. I missed you, Leo sobbed, clinging to her. I've got you, Sarah whispered, rocking him. I've got you, and I'm never letting go again. Behind them, Brad was led out in handcuffs, charged with fraud. He watched his wife and son embrace, realizing too late that the most valuable asset he ever had wasn't the company. It was them. 6 months later, the view from 40,000 feet was breathtaking. Sarah sat in the cream leather seat of her private Gulfstream G650, looking out at the endless horizon. On the table before her sat an iPad Pro displaying the quarterly earnings for the newly rebranded Cross Technologies. The stock was up 150%. The Core X algorithm, now properly managed and ethically sourced, had revolutionized the medical tech industry. Across the aisle, Leo was sound asleep, clutching a new stuffed rabbit. He looked healthy, his cheeks rosy, the shadows of the past 6 months completely erased by therapy and love. Sarah took a sip of Dom Pérignon. It tasted like victory. Somewhere far below, in a federal correctional facility in upstate New York, Brad Sterling was trading cigarettes for protection. He had pleaded guilty to securities fraud to avoid a longer sentence for child endangerment. Tiffany, turning on him until the bitter end, was serving her own time in a minimum security prison for embezzlement. Her modeling career and reputation permanently incinerated. Sarah didn't think about them anymore. They were just bad lines of code she had deleted from her operating system. Penny, for your thoughts? Atticus Thorne walked from the cockpit area, loosening his tie. He sat on the ottoman across from her, his gray eyes warm. He wasn't her lawyer anymore. He was her partner, in business and in life. I was just thinking, Sarah smiled, setting her glass down. I spent 10 years thinking I was weak because I loved my family. But that love was the only thing that saved us. You were never weak, Sarah, Atticus said softly. You were just sleeping. I'm glad you woke up. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't a ring. Not yet. It was a necklace. A vintage sapphire pendant surrounded by diamonds. Sarah gasped. My mother's. Brad sold this years ago to pay for his seed funding. I tracked it down at an auction in Geneva, Atticus said, fastening it around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin. It belongs to the Cross family, just like the company, just like the future. Sarah touched the cool stone, tears pricking her eyes. She looked at Atticus, then at her sleeping son. She had walked through fire, faced the devil, and come out the other side not just as a survivor, but as a queen. To the future, Sarah whispered, she clinking her glass against his. The jet banked smoothly toward the sunset, carrying them home. The mistress had smiled in court, but the wife, the mother, the CEO, had the last laugh. So, the story has finally come to a close. To our amazing friends who are still here at this very moment, thank you. If you are truly still here, I know something in Sarah's journey has touched your heart. We often mistake silence for weakness, just like Brad did. But this story reminds us that true power isn't about how loud you shout. It's about how you compose yourself when your world is falling apart. Sarah showed us that dignity is a weapon, and patience is the ultimate strategy. She didn't seek revenge out of spite. She sought justice out of love for her son. It brings to mind a powerful lesson from Stoicism. As the Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Sarah didn't lower herself to their level of cruelty. She rose above it, building a life of success and peace that they could never touch. If this story of resilience and redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength. Don't forget to subscribe so we can continue this journey together. You are stronger than you know.